Julia Roman-Duval is an astronomer at the Space Telescope Science Institute, where she currently holds the position of interim head of the Hubble Space Telescope Mission Office. She was born and raised in France, moved to the U.S. almost 2 decades ago to pursue graduate school and a career in astrophysics. She's the mother of 3 children, currently in middle and high school. Other than being fans of science and astronomy, Julia and her family are a very outdoorsy, adventurous family. Julia is also an elite endurance athlete, specifically in distance running and triathlon. She qualified for the U.S. Marathon Olympic Team trials in 2016 and 2020 and has run several marathon world majors with the professional field, finishing 17th in Chicago in 2019. You can read her whole bio on our website, Creative Mornings Baltimore. Please help me welcome Julia to the stage.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you. Wow, I'm excited. I hope you are too. So I'm here today to cover the theme of vision, which is pretty broad, but I happen to be an astronomer, and vision is absolutely a key tool for us astronomers to understand the cosmos. So vision can mean different things, but at a very basic level is the ability to see. And whether that be objects surrounding us, light from the sun gets reflected on those objects, gets to our eyes, we see it. But it's also the ability to see what lies in front of us in the future and having some clarity in our goals and the path to get there. So I'm going to get started with a bit of history about my upbringing because it plays a very important role in how I came up with the vision for my own life and my family and what led me to science. So I was born and raised in France. I was the oldest of 4 siblings, and my family and my parents like to move around. And so you can see everywhere I've lived in France, we used to move every 2 or 3 years. But very importantly, when I was 10, we moved to Reunion Island, which is this little dot in the Indian Ocean there. There's actually nothing between Reunion Island and the South Pole. It's a French island, kind of like Hawaii for the United States. It's partially inhabited, and so the skies there are super clear. You can see the Milky Way every night. You can get up on the top of the mountain and see everything. And so when I lived there, I was 11 years old, and I read a kid's science magazine about special relativity by Einstein. And I was like, wow, this is cool. And I was immediately hooked. And from that day on, I wanted to be an astrophysicist. I wanted to work in the US. And I never, ever, I think, got my eyes off the prize. And I've been pursuing this path ever since. And so after returning to domestic France and spending a few years there, I moved to Boston to go to grad school for astronomy, got my PhD, and then landed in Baltimore, where I have been for 15 years now. And here we are today. So you could say, I guess, my vision for what I wanted to do with my life, including the very outdoorsy lifestyle that we can talk about after, that's a different story, was born in Reunion Island. So in Baltimore, I work at the Space Telescope Science Institute, also known as STSCI. You can see a picture of our main building here. The Space Telescope Science Institute operates space telescopes. There are currently 3 of them that we operate. The Hubble Space Telescope, which I hope many of you have heard about. And that's this one right here. And the James Webb Space Telescope, which launched 3 years ago now on Christmas Day, and is completely breaking ground in terms of what we can now see in the universe. And that's the one on the right here. Its mirror is about 3 times as big as Hubble, so it's huge. And then the third telescope that you may have not heard about is the Roman Space Telescope. It's this one in the middle. It was not named after me. I actually get my name from my husband. It's Roman. He's from Puerto Rico. But that telescope is actually going to launch in 2 years. So we're super excited because at this point we'll have a fleet of 3 telescopes orbiting near Earth. And basically covering all kinds of light that we can see in the universe. So I work on the Hubble Space Telescope, and I would say it's kind of my fourth kid in a way. I really care about it. Hubble orbits above our heads at about 500 kilometers. So it goes around the Earth every 90 minutes. And it takes pictures of astronomical objects in the universe that can be pretty far, actually, all the way to basically the edge of the universe. Hubble has been in space for 34 years. So when it launched in 1990, I was only 8 years old. So you could say a lot of us astronomers that are in my generation were raised with Hubble. One of the reasons that it has so much longevity is that it was serviced using the space shuttle several times. And you can see some pictures here of the astronauts working on the telescope. And every time they went up there, they installed new components. For example, replaced solar panels, installed new instruments that were much more state-of-the-art and evolving with the science field. They replaced computers, gyroscopes that helped the telescope point to the right targets, et cetera, et cetera. And so the last one was in 2009, so it's been 15 years now. And Hubble is still operating super strong and producing groundbreaking science all the time. So there was one problem initially. When Hubble was launched in 1990, I guess people hadn't realized there was a small error in the shape of its mirror. And so its vision was blurred. And that was a huge disappointment because NASA and partners had been working so hard to put this telescope up in space, which is technologically very challenging. And so 2 years later, astronauts went back and they inserted corrective optics into the telescope to restore Hubble's vision. And you can see a sharp difference. This is a nearby galaxy called M100. Once they inserted the corrective optics, you went from this to this. So the vision was much less blurred. And then thanks to the ability to service the telescope, in 2009, they installed even yet better detectors. And now you can see all the sharp detail in that galaxy. And so it really transformed the way we do astronomy. I couldn't be here without sharing some of my favorite images taken by the Hubble. You can go back. We have a website called Hubble Site where we have all the Hubble pictures that you can look at maybe with a darker room and the details emerge better. But on the left here, you have the antenna galaxy. That is my favorite Hubble picture of all. These are galaxies that are in the process of merging. And so these are very turbulent, energetic events that actually trigger very intense episodes of star formation. And so every little red dot that you can see here is a massive star in the process of forming. And you can see those dark lanes here in those galaxies, and that's actually interstellar dust. It's like soot and sand that act as a screen and block the stellar light behind it. On the right is the cosmic reef. That is the image that was taken for the 30th anniversary of Hubble a few years ago. And that's a nebula in the Large Hadron Cloud, which is our closest neighbor galaxy. And again, you can see stars forming, and there's gas and dust that is the nebulosity you can see in this image. Okay, 2 more, and then I'll move on. This is R136. It's a massive star cluster, also in the Large Hadron Cloud. Every blue dot you can see here is a massive star. A massive star is 10 to 200 times more massive than our own sun. Those stars are extremely powerful. They shine in blue. Our sun is kind of yellow. Those stars are blue and very energetic. So they drive very powerful winds and radiation that can completely disrupt entire sections of galaxies. And you can see here all those stars collectively have pushed away their native birth cloud. And that's all this nebulosity that you can see here in the interstellar medium, which is all the nebulous stuff between the stars and galaxies. And that's shining at different colors. And then on the right here is a pretty famous image where Hubble was staring at a relatively empty part of the sky for a very long time. But the sky is not empty because Hubble is so big, it can collect a lot of light. We can see very faint objects. And so in the middle here, you have a cluster of galaxies. These are very massive galaxies. And they're so massive, in fact, that they can bend the light from galaxies in the background and act as a gravitational lens. And that actually allows astronomers to see the very confines of the universe, very distant galaxies that were formed, a few 100 million years after the Big Bang. So we're looking back something like 13.4 billion years ago. Hubble's incredible. I would share more images, but I think I'm on a schedule here, so I'll move on. So, as I said, vision, the ability to see, is a key tool for astronomy. Astronomy actually has Greek roots. It's aster and nomia, which literally means naming or assembling the stars. The first documented records of astronomical observations date back to 1000 before Christ in what is now southern Iraq. And people there started documenting the periodic motions of celestial bodies, and they just use their eyes. And so I wanted to go back to the very basic principle of how vision works with the eyes. So you basically have the pupil. The light enters your eyes through the pupil. You have your cornea and a lens that can contract or relax to make sure that the light from objects surrounding us gets focused in the right area, right onto the retina. And the retina then has some small detectors that can convert those images into electrical signals that are sent to the brain, and the brain interprets it. Telescopes don't work very differently from the eye, but I wanted to point out first that our eyes can only see a very small, narrow region of light. It's called visible light. These are the colors that we're used to: red, green, blue, yellow, purple, etc. But light extends a much broader spectrum that is determined by what we call the wavelength. And that's really the length of that light wave. And so at wavelengths that are shorter, bluer, light is more energetic. And so examples of things are the ultraviolet. You go to the beach, you don't put sunscreen, you get sunburn, right? That's because this ultraviolet light is energetic enough to actually break through your DNA. And then at even more energetic types of light, you have the X-ray. X-ray can penetrate through much of anything, and so you use it to see when you have fractures on your bones. Conversely, at longer wavelength, it's light that is less energetic, and so examples include the infrared. You can use your TV remote using infrared light. And our bodies actually are warm enough that they emit thermal wavelengths, so infrared, and you can use thermal cameras for that, like night vision. And then at longer wavelengths, low energy, you have your microwave, you have your radio, and your cell phones, etc. Our eyes can only see this. Telescopes can see that entire spectrum of light. Telescopes work very similarly to our eyes, in a sense. So you basically have a collecting aperture. It's like a bucket for all of the light waves and the photons. And then you have some kind of optics. It can be a mirror or it can be a lens that can bend light and focus it either on an eyepiece where you can look into and see the objects, or on a detector to actually take pictures, like the CCD of your phone cameras. You have two types of telescopes, really. Some use reflections and have mirrors to bend light, and some have lenses and use refraction to bend light, like our eyes. The bigger the aperture of a telescope, the bigger the bucket that collects that light, the fainter the objects you're going to see. And so, for example, Hubble's mirror is 2 meters in diameter, and it can only reach something like galaxies that were formed 500 million years after the Big Bang. The James Webb mirror is about 3 times bigger. It's 6.5 meters in diameter. I mean, the thing is a bus. It's huge. And that can actually see much farther into the universe. In addition, when the aperture of the bigger the aperture of a telescope, the more fine details you can see. And so here, I wanted to compare 2 telescopes that operate in infrared light. The Spitzer Space Telescope, which was actually a NASA flagship mission that observed the sky in the infrared. And you can see a nebula here that was observed by the Spitzer Space Telescope on the left. Spitzer's mirror had a diameter of 85 centimeters, so something like about this, right? And you can see, there's also an image here of a supernova that exploded, observed by the Spitzer Space Telescope. And now I want you to contrast this with the same objects observed with the James Webb Space Telescope. That mirror, it's 6.5 meters. So I would say up to the second floor, maybe. A little less, I don't know, eyeballing it. That bigger aperture can actually provide us vision with a tremendous amount of detail. And so that same field observed with the James Webb is this one. Can you see how blurred the vision of Spitzer is compared to James Webb? That's just crazy. You can see all the details of those objects here. And so us astronomers have been pushing for bigger and bigger telescopes exactly because of this. We can see fainter objects because we can collect more light, and we can see more detail. And so the size of the telescope actually is one of the key factors in how big we can push for. So we have telescopes that operate almost the entire wavelength range of light. Hubble operates in the visible, so the light that we can all see, but also in the ultraviolet. And that's very important because there's a lot happening in astronomy in the ultraviolet. James Webb and Roman operate in the infrared. Those wavelengths are actually opaque to the atmosphere. You cannot see this from the ground, and that is exactly why you need to have those telescopes up in space. We do have ground-based telescopes that can see the visible, but the atmosphere is like this fluid that is turbulent, and it really distorts the vision that we can have of things that are above our atmosphere. And so that's another reason why you actually need telescope up in space, because this provides the finest detail that you can ever achieve. And then we also have telescopes that look at very energetic light, like Fermi and Chandra, that looks like X-ray or gamma ray. And these, track very, very energetic events in the universe, like supernova explosions, or merging of black holes or neutron stars, things that are extremely explosive. So I wanted to show you how different the same astronomical object looks at different types of light. So this is Andromeda. It's a very nearby galaxy to us. It's actually very similar to the Milky Way, our own Milky Way. And it's been observed in a lot of wavelengths. I don't know why some of the letters here got trimmed, but that's okay. On the left here, you have Andromeda seen in the radio. So very long wavelengths, just like your AM radio. And this actually traces all the hydrogen gas in that galaxy that is available to form stars. In the infrared, which is the type of wavelength that would be probed by the James Webb Space Telescope, you can see the emission from this interstellar dust that I was mentioning, which is basically like soot and sand. And it's heated up by stars, that have radiation, heat up the dust, and then it emits in the infrared, just like our bodies emit in infrared. In the visible light, you can see basically all the stellar populations in that galaxy. The yellow stars are stars like our sun in terms of mass and size. The blue dots here, which you can't resolve on the screen, but actually with Hubble images, you can resolve them one by one, which is insane if you think about it. Those are all massive stars. They're much more massive than the sun, and they shine in the blue wavelength range. Then in the ultraviolet, you start looking at more energetic things, like very massive stars that are like 10, 20, 100 times more massive than our sun. And those will emit a lot of light in the ultraviolet, and that's why they're so powerful in driving the evolution of galaxies, because they can disrupt molecules, and they can push things away. So they're an important component. And then in the X-ray, those are extremely energetic events. Usually here you can see things that are happening near the central black hole of that galaxy. So different lights, different phenomena, different morphologies. And it's extremely important for us astronomers to have access to all those types of light so we can really understand what's happening in any kind of astronomical objects, galaxies, stars, black holes, etc. So none of this would be possible without visionaries. those telescopes that I just talked about, cost a lot of money, something like, $8, $9, $10 billion. They're also extremely complex. And it took a lot of effort to actually convince lawmakers in the beginning that this was even possible. And so you can see here 3 visionaries for the Hubble Space Telescope. John Bacall and Lyman Spitzer in the 40s were some of the first astronomers to pioneer space telescopes. They realized the importance of putting a telescope up in space above the atmosphere so that we could see all the details from the astronomical observations and also collect as much light as we could. And so they really advocated with lawmakers to get funding and support to try to develop those space telescopes. And they also contributed technically to the projects. Nancy Grace Roman, who is the lady that the Roman Space Telescope is named after, was the first chief of astronomy at NASA and the first woman in a leadership position there. She had a vision for the Large Space Telescope, which now we know as the Hubble Space Telescope. She lobbied with lawmakers to get early funding to develop such a telescope. She really made the vision of Bacall and Lyman come true. She did all the work. She rallied the community, the scientific community, behind the Hubble Space Telescope to make it happen. She worked with the engineers and the astronomers to actually develop the concept. See, she's known as the mother of Hubble, really. And so I think those 3 telescopes here are really the result of a shared vision, and it really demonstrates what can happen when we all have buy-in as a community, share a vision, and that can achieve those big things. And I think that's also scalable to all aspects of our lives, personal, professional, athletic, and whatever, where we can have clarity in our goals, in our path to happiness and success and self-satisfaction, and in the path it also takes to get there. And so that would be my concluding remark, is always keep your eyes on the prize. And if you do, anything's possible. Thanks. Oh, yeah. For those interested, I actually have a piece of hardware from the Hubble. These are pieces of the solar panels that were initially flown between 1990 and 1992. And I think if you look closely, you will see micrometeorite impacts on there. So that was in space for 2 years, and then it was brought back down.
Now you're just holding it.
And I'm just holding it. It's crazy. Yeah, feel free to take a look later. I'll just leave it here.
So now we're going to open it up for some Q&A. So while you're getting started, I'll go to you first, but I'll open it up. I feel as somebody who's like a non-science person, you made this very accessible, and like I'm still like kind of like trying to like think about some of the concepts. It's very cool. I also want to highlight to all of you that if the screen was hard for you to see, the signs around the room have a QR code where you can access the slides. So now, later, whenever, just for like that access note. In your bio, it also talks about you being an endurance athlete. So how do you tell us a little bit more about that and how you think that plays into all of this?
Yeah, I have a lot to say about that. Well, I will start with just, astronomy is not just a job to me. It's kind of a lifestyle. And I would say endurance sports also are a lifestyle. It's just a part of who I am. I guess growing up, I couldn't really sit still for like 5 seconds, maybe 3 seconds, I don't know. Anyway, always had to move. And I got into endurance sports actually pretty late in my 20s, first with triathlons and then running. My work and running kind of feed off each other. The running gives me the discipline and the focus to be able to have creative ideas and clarity in the things that I need to do at work. And then vice versa, work gives me enough to think about, even stress sometimes. I actually need to go running to keep my sanity. And so they're very complementary. I'm very passionate about both. I don't think I could live without both because they're just part of the lifestyle. I was fortunate that I was able to be a part of really big things in running. I think the Olympic trials in 2016 was a highlight of that. But I also found in running there's a community that is extremely supportive and friendly and inclusive. And that's actually why I switched from triathlons to endurance running. I had just had my third kid, and I was training by myself for triathlons, but I was kind of not very happy with the things. It was very lonely. And I met this lady at the pool who was a triathlete. She's like, why don't you go check out that group of runners? They meet on Tuesdays at 6 a.m. at the track. And I did, and it was a completely life-changing experience because I found a group that is extremely supportive and in all aspects of life. You can talk to them about anything. And so I started running with them. And they discovered that I had a thing for running. And a year and a half later, I think I was making the Olympic trials, which is crazy when you think about it. But
as you do.
It was a very humbling and amazing experience to be able to run with the best professionals in the country. And yeah, I mean, I can share with some of you later, maybe if you have specific questions about that.
Yeah, thanks.
Hi, a great speech. Space is cool.
I agree, yeah.
So my question is, you mentioned that the spectrum of light we see visible, but the different telescopes, the different lenses are processing information from other wavelengths. And that information informs you different aspects, different characteristics, but you take all of that information and you kind of seamless process it together to get the bigger picture of like what's happening in this whole universe. That information applies to your life as an endurance athlete, as a mom, as an astrophysicist. So you're taking information from all these other light sources. How do you find strategies or community to take that information in and be able to produce knowledge from it?
Okay, so I can respond for astronomical things specifically and then life in general. For astronomy, the field now is so broad and so deep that you cannot be an expert at everything. And so we have experts at different science aspects. For example, some people study stars, and some people study galaxies, and some people study the interstellar medium, like I do, which is all the nebulosity between the gas and stars. Different wavelengths will also be kind of matrix with that, because they give you different kinds of information about the nature of those different objects. And so generally, I think the key to this is collaboration and being surrounded by the experts you need to understand the big picture of what's happening in the particular object that you're studying. And so that's why now, a while ago, astronomy was mostly driven by single individuals that were advancing the field, like Newton and Einstein. But now we see that astronomy is mostly done by large collaborations, because that's what it takes to advance a field that's already gotten extremely deep and broad. And so collaboration is key. And the same is true in life, I would say. For running, for example, right? If it's winter and it's dark and it's cold at 6 a.m., and I'm training by myself, I may actually stay in bed. But if I know that my team's already there and we have a workout plan and it's going to be fun, then heck yeah, I'm going to get up and I'm going to go. It's more than supporting each other. We motivate each other, right? We learn training tips, things about anatomy, because everybody has a boo-boo somewhere from running and we need to treat it. And so again, I come back to this community aspect of running that's really key to making it a happy experience, but also progressing and getting stronger and faster. And I think everyone will give you a different perspective, just like different wavelengths of light give you a different perspective. And that's extremely important. And you see the pros also train, they don't train by themselves, right? They have groups that are organized and structured. And I don't think the times we've seen lately, especially for women in the field. Like when I went to the Olympic trials in 2016, there were 200 of us qualifying. In 2020, there were over 400. And the running field really took off because women started to get together, training together, and they made each other faster. And so the times just skyrocketed. And that doesn't happen by chance. It's because there's a together part.
Thank you for your talk. I'm back here.
Sorry.
So we have a space-obsessed child who probably would read things like that. My husband also read things like that when he was 11. And I think it's really interesting that we have the Space Science Telescope Institute locally. But if you're 11, 14, like how is there a way that kids could get, or people could get involved with something like this? Are there like events or science things that kids who might want to be physicists or people who might want to do physics could do?
Yeah, so actually around this area, there's plenty, which is why my husband, who is a nurse scientist, and I decided to move here after grad school. So at STSCI itself, like we have a lot of outreach events. There's a public lecture, although that's mostly geared towards, I guess, older teenagers and adults. But we also have youth events that kids can participate to. There are public tours of the Mission Operations Center for the James Webb Space Telescope. A lot of us astronomers actually go out to schools and give talks because the kids are like sponges, right? And they have the best questions, like no filter. And so, you know, we try to, even if they can't really understand all the things that we expose them to, we expose them to these things, right? And that's like the most important part is a kindergartner, I will start explaining about galaxies and supernova because they will be exposed and it will be there. And then maybe 2-3 years later, another astronomer comes along and talks to them. Is like, oh yeah, I know, actually heard about this before. And they start linking things together. So I would say yes, on the STSAI webpage, we have an outreach page where there are some details about events that kids can participate in. I will also mention that the Johns Hopkins University, which is right across the street from STSEI, also has a physics and astronomy department, and they do have outreach events. NASA Goddard, they're a little down south, also has a very strong public outreach component. There's a visitor center kids can visit. There are things to see. Yeah, I think that there's just, I guess, plenty. Maybe the information doesn't percolate super efficiently, so we should maybe, us astronomers, work on that better.
Yeah, I'm so sorry, but we actually have to cut Q&A a little bit shorter than we normally do because the BSO starts practicing in 5 minutes, and we can't have amplified sound out here after that. But Julia's happy to stick around for a couple minutes and answer your questions. So I'm sorry. I know we usually try to get to all the questions, so I apologize, y'all. But can you help me thank Julia again?
Thanks, everyone.